Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter is one of Great Britain's most celebrity scientists. He is a statistics professor at Cambridge University. From 2007 till 2018, he was a Winton Professor of Public Understanding of Risk in the Statistical Laboratory at the University of Cambridge, and is also one of ISI most highly cited researchers, which is a great source of envy for me, but we will talk about it later. And this is a book that he wrote, The Art of Statistics, Learning from Data, which is a great book. Plus, he is a world expert in loop, which is a circular version of pool, or as we call it in Israel, billiard. Now, I know that pool and billiard are not the same thing. Nevertheless, so Sir Professor David Spiegelhalter, thank you so much for coming. How are you today?
I'm fine. It's great. It's a beautiful sunny day here in England.
And this is a very rare occasion. Sunny, beautiful. It's beautiful and sunny. So it's very...
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Very rare.
Okay, so with your permission, let's start with the difficult questions, okay? Now, there is a concept, both in psychology and artificial intelligence, of transfer learning. Now, the idea is that you learn something, a skill, in a specific domain, and this knowledge somehow transferred to other domains as well. Now, we also know that your ability to transfer learn increases as the two domains are more similar. So my question is, how well do you play pool? In other words, how loop and pool similar? How much loop and pool are similar?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I had a very bad youth, so I spent a lot of time playing snooker and billiards, and I got fairly good at it. And then someone invented this game, loop, which is not circular, it's elliptical. So it's played on an elliptical table. Now, you know, an ellipse, and it's got a focus here and a focus there. And on one of these focus, there's the hole, and the other one there's a dot. Now, the mathematics of ellipses is such that any line that goes through the one focus, the dot, will bounce off the side and go through the other focus, the way the light reflects around an ellipse, which means that you can play on an elliptical pool table rather well, because if you can hit a ball over that dot, it should go into the other pocket. So it's only got one pocket in the whole table. And so, and you play it a bit like billiards, but with this one pocket. And I won the competition. So I got some crummy little trophy. And I think there's only one table in the world. So there's not been a replay yet in the World Championship. So I think I'm still the world champion. Yeah.
So again, since there is like this very big difference between loop and pool, so your ability to play pool is not, you're not even close to world expert in pool, because again, this one thing with this one difference that you just mentioned makes a whole new game.
Yeah, but I used a mixture of a bit of old skill of playing normal pool and then mathematical knowledge and mathematical ability to realize that you had to completely change your strategy. Because also with a table, with a smooth surface, you can actually hit the ball and it goes right the way around the table and comes back to where it was, which of course you cannot do on a rectangular table. So you could break, if you were snookered, if you were blocked, you could hit it in completely the wrong direction and it would go all the way around and come back the other side. So these are these new tricks that had to be developed in order to play on a different shaped table.
It's like the difference between Euclidean geometry and
geometry. Exactly. Yeah, suddenly I'm in a curved space. It's very useful. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when I write your name on Spotify, and what I see over and over again is you talking about risk. And this is part of what you do. You explain risk. You try to educate the general public about true risk in life. And many people don't understand risk. For example, shark attacks are much more rare than drowning in your private pool. And many other examples like this. Now, in the context of Israel, and I'm talking from Israel, the risk of getting injured in a car accident is much more severe, much more common than a terror attack, much more common. Now, do you agree with this line of thought that we shouldn't be so much afraid of terror attack because car accidents are much more dangerous in the pure mathematical sense, or there is a rational justification to be more intimidated by terror attack? By the way, the Latin root of the word terror is fear. So what's your take on that?
Yeah. When I started working in risk, I come from a background of mathematics and statistics, and I started with this very strict rational approach. We should look at the numbers and do the probability, and in a way, our response then should be proportional to these absolute risks. I've soon changed my mind. I think because I've spent for the last, nearly 15 years, I suppose, mainly working with psychologists and social scientists on this, and I've been so influenced by the brilliant work of people like Paul Slovic and Baruch Fischoff and these others who worked on this stuff for decades. And Baruch Fischoff in particular is extremely good at distinguishing, saying there's risk as analysis, which is what you're talking about, and then there's risk as feeling, our emotional response to threat and situations. And he says you cannot separate these. These are so strongly intertwined that we have to take them both into account. And so our response to, and again, lots of research showing that our response to threats is not, proportional, and it never will be proportional to the absolute risk, because our emotions come into it so strongly. And, the Paul Slovic 30, 40 years ago established these sort of fright factors or things that really trigger an emotional response to do with essentially, a lot of it is someone else to blame. Whose fault is it? Why am I experiencing this? Is it something I've volunteered to do, like drive a car, or is it something being imposed on me from outside? It's a huge difference. Immediately in the example you're doing shows the difference in that. The unfairness of a risk. Are the vulnerable being exposed to it? Whether I understand that threat. Whether it's really mysterious and strange and things. And you can see these ideas. There's others as well, which I'm sure we can imagine. But we can see these fears being worked out in all our lives. Whether it's the fact the enormous threat with Fukushima, the huge terror of escaped radiation from a nuclear power plant. Now, in fact, of course, it was absolutely minimal. Vast amount more harm caused by the evacuation than was ever caused by any of the radiation. So minimal human risk from the radiation, massive harm caused by the evacuation, a huge over-response by the authorities and around the world of fear of this. Because radiation is somebody's fault, it's invisible, we don't really quite understand it, it appears, it triggers all those fright feelings in us. Now, that's a situation where I think there was a real irrational over-response because of these feelings. But we can't deny this. We can't just say, oh, we all should be perfect, rational human beings. We are not. And thank goodness. It would be awful if we were. So I think this sort of rational response, I do think it's good to think about magnitudes. And in COVID, you could see, people feel very different about threats depending on where they come from. You can see people blaming other people for not wearing masks, and they're exposing me to risk. And so again, we have this very emotional response because of who's responsible for my anxiety. So I'm not sure if I'm sounding very clear here, but what I'm saying, I suppose, is that you cannot take out the emotional response, and it's inappropriate to do that. But we should also, I think, recognize that there can be a real contradiction, and to explore that, at least to demonstrate it and say, well, now look, actually, the risk is a lot higher. But that doesn't mean that you are wrong or stupid or anything to respond in this way.
No, you're human.
You're human. You're human.
But
the people,
yes.
Yeah, but the people I want to be a little less human are the policymakers, because they should be thinking about, they should be thinking about what is the biggest impact on the health and the well-being of society and things like that. They should be able to take a bigger picture of this and not be quite so vulnerable to people's anxieties. And you can see this being played out, all the time about balancing risks. Oh, I mean, we could talk about the German approach to nuclear power and the mess that's got them in now because of this enormous anxiety about nuclear power, which I think is completely ill-founded. Enormously safe technology, and the enormous mess that's got them into in this case.
But but what you say is, okay, we are human, and we can't, and the emotional fear and the mathematical fear are intertwined. And it was Daniel Bernoulli who said, okay, like in the late 1770s, like over 200 years ago, that we don't take like in profit, we think about how what we have already, and then we extrapolate the degree of happiness. So we are human, but your job as an advocate of risk math to the general public is your job is to say, listen, I know that you're emotional, but hey, the numbers are completely different. Therefore, statistic means the arithmetics of the state, okay? Because the state has nothing other than statistic. Therefore, we need to make the massive amount of effort in car accidents because they are much, much more severe, much more fatal.
Yeah, no, but I don't think, again, no, I think obviously that you do need to do this, but the state also know that anxiety about terror attacks can paralyze a society. It can cause huge economic disruption if people have that degree of anxiety. And I think it is quite justifiable that a state wants to avoid its population for political reasons as much as anything, to have that degree of, there's this nice term, outrage. That people are outraged. This should not happen. This should not happen in society. There are certain things that just should not happen. Even if they're very rare, even if they happen to a few people will feel this should not happen. And therefore, I think quite rationally, there's a lot of expenditure to avoid these things that should not happen. And because of people's feelings that this is just, just unacceptable in a modern
society. Since people are irrational sometimes, or to some degrees, we as the state need to apply rational thinking and combining those factors as well.
Well, I think that basically you just need to be transparent. I think you can do both. You can say, well, actually, terrorist attacks or these terrible disaster things are rare. Not that many people are killed and injured. We've had them in the UK as well, of course. But we are still going to, spend resources on trying to prevent these because we don't feel that these have got a place in modern society. You can see this in transport as well. The enormous amount of money that's spent on, say, preventing rail accidents, and nobody's been killed in a rail accident in the UK for I think about 15 years. So they're unbelievably safe to travel by train, you could say almost, well, they're almost too safe. The huge money that's spent on making them even safer. They're already just ridiculously safe almost. So, but people feel a train crash. It looks so catastrophic. It's so awful that it again, people have a feeling of outrage. This should not happen.
It's like a plane crash. It's like a
plane crashes as well. Yeah. So, in fact, the Rail Safety Board in the UK has employed a philosopher who did some wondrful analysis, because they were wondering why are people still saying we should make the trains safer when they're so safe? Why do they have to be safe? And he went through all this. So they needed to have a philosopher to essentially bring all this idea out about public outrage and how, in a sense, to avoid that, then there was a demand to spend a lot of money. So I think the point is that I never want to say anything's right or wrong. That's not my job at all. But I think what I really want is just to see transparency about everything.
Try to explain.
And the benefits and harms of all policy. If you're going to spend a lot of money on lowering what is already a very low risk, okay, this is the effect, and this is the cost, because you're spending this huge amount of money which you could spend somewhere else and spend better. So my approach is not that I never tell anyone what to do. It's not my job at all. All I say is that when there is a decision based on risk, let's at least be honest about it and see the benefits and harms, and very broadly expressed. So not just in terms of things we can count, The crucial thing is you don't just measure what is. It's easy to count things. No, the difficult bit is what isn't being counted, which is people's feelings and people's responses. So that is important, but it's just one part of the equation. So that it's part of the equation, part of the balance. And sometimes it's just not worth it. Really, we can be spending, I don't know, we've got nuclear waste disposal. Oh my God, the vast amounts of money spent on something that is so safe. It's untrue. Just in order to vaguely keep some people happy.
The other part is that you can put price tag on everything, including human life. And this is what we do in the NIH, or this is when you take one drug and put it inside, the medicine market, that this is a free medicine, etc., etc. You can put price tag on everything, including life, and you do it all the time.
We've been doing that in the UK for about 20 years now. The price doesn't seem to have gone up that much. It was always £20,000 for a year. It started off about 15,000, went up to 20. That's up to about £30,000 for a healthy life year. What the National Health Service is prepared to pay for a new treatment. One of the issue things. This is set up and it got accepted. Really, everyone thought this is a rational way to decide what resources. But typically with this, you've got a nice sort of rule, and then people keep on finding exceptions. For serious cancer care, we'll pay a lot more for that. End of life care, when people, it's a last resort, people have only got a few months to live, we'll pay a lot more for that. So children, we'll pay a lot more for that. So and I'm not saying that's wrong, but it is what happens. But it's because it actually is being transparent, and it's acknowledging there are societal values coming into that, but they're transparent. So that's fine. That's fine.
In our initial conversation, you said that you are not Jewish, although you have a very
I know,
peculiar Jewish name. So let me give you like the Jewish take on price tag on life.
Yeah.
And there was a rabbi called Maram of Württemberg in the 12th century, I think, and he was kidnapped by the Gentiles, and they demanded like a tremendous amount of money for him. And he said, and this was like the Judeo rule, that the price tag of a man is how much he will be worth as a slave in the market. So I'm not taking into account, how smart he is, how beneficial he is for society. I just want to give him the price tag of a slave, and he died in prison because he didn't allow for his community to free him.
So what a story!
What a story! Yes, so we don't make any exception like in the old Judeo, but in Israel we make a lot of exceptions. But Maram of Württemberg say the worth of a man is how much he was as a slave, and this is a very interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah, it's very egalitarian.
Yes.
Very functional definition. Yeah,
okay.
I don't think I'd be worth very much.
And again, in Israel, when in Israel we with all this thing with Hamas, and we value life much more than our enemies, and therefore this is so uneven when you come to negotiation. But this is like the new Israel, and not like the Judeo, the halacha Judeo philosophy. This is very strange. Okay, now there is another concept in risk. I think that you introduced it to me because it's called Micromort. That you just fell off. You just parachute. How you say it, from an airplane to demonstrate this? Yes.
Yeah, did a skydive.
So what is Micromort?
Okay, Micromort. I didn't invent it. Ron Howard from Stanford invented it, and in a way, it's taking the first approach, the rational approach. So it is trying to put a number on the risks that we take, and it's a 1 in a million chance of getting killed. So it's to do with acute risks, accidents, things which will kill you on the spot. So it's not to do with the effects of drinking or smoking or coffee, not these long-term chronic risks. This is to do with dangerous activities.
Bungee jump.
Sorry?
Bungee jump. Like
bungee jump. Well, I don't know what the stats are on bungee jumps. Probably quite low. A lot of the things we do, which we consider fairly risky, come in at about 5 to 10. So scuba diving. skydiving's between 5 and about 7 to 10. So in other words, there's, out of every million skydives, around roughly about 7 to 10 people will get killed in doing it. And roughly same for scuba diving. Running a marathon is about 7 in a million. So a lot of these things people do voluntarily come in at, which have got some risk, come in at much more than that, and it's considered really dangerous. Base jumping, it's about 400, jumping off some cliff with a set of wings. That's about 400 or something like that. So very rare that people are prepared to do that.
But you incorporate your age. You say, okay, since I'm old, sorry, David.
Yeah.
I'm old. I need to treat the Micromorts differently. So please explain how your age plays a role.
Yeah, I think so. That's again quite an emotional response, because I did a skydive for this TV program where I was demonstrating it. So I reckon there's about 7 Micromorts. Now, first of all, that's on average that's about a week's worth of normal risk. It's about every time you get out of bed, that's about. And you live a normal day. On average, it's about 1 Micromort. That something will happen, car will knock you over, something will fall on your head, you'll trip over, something like that. So average one varies quite a lot with age. It's higher for younger and older people, because older people have more accidents and younger people have more accidents. But as my risk of dying every day just goes up as I get older. I'm 69 or something. And how old am I? 68. Anyway. So it goes up all the time. So in a way, doing a skydive now, when I haven't got so many years to live, as when I'm young, is using up, in a way, less of the risk that I've actually got. I'm living with all the time. It's a smaller proportion of the risk I'm actually facing, because when you're young, you're incredibly safe. No, for a Western, primary school kid, 7-year, 8-year-old kid, no one's ever been safer in the whole history of humanity. So, actually, it doesn't make sense for them to go skydiving. But for some old fool like me, I might as well do it. I've been thinking of taking up motorcycling, which is the most dangerous thing you can ever think of. But I kind of think, let
me tell you what really surprised me in your TV special. It wasn't just the math that you say, okay, this is, A is bigger than B. You just got on an airplane and jumped. So it wasn't like a theoretical math. It was practical math that you actually apply those concepts in real life and jumped out of an airplane.
But I only did it once. I'm not going to take it up as a hobby. And similarly, I will ride on I went for a ride on the back of a motorbike last week. I don't actually want to do it regularly. Because one of the problems of getting older, in fact, for my own sake, I think it's quite sensible to take risks and things like that. But I would kind of want to be around for my children and grandchildren and things like that. I like getting older, and so
you can contribute to society much more.
Oh wow, yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay, so
I think that. Yeah.
From there, let's go to your great book, The Art of Statistics: Learning from Data, and I tell my freshman data science students to read it because I think it's a fabulous read. It's a fabulous and it's a great read. But let's start with the second word, the art. Now, It seems that statistics is a boring, heavy math thing, and you incorporate the word art.
Absolutely.
Now, unless your ability to play with the number and lie with statistics is a measure of how good artist you are. So why did you write art?
Oh yeah,
it's art about statistics.
Completely deliberate, because it was trying to get away from the way that people are often taught. They do their Stat 101 course in university, and it's just, here's some data, here's a method to apply to it. This is how you fit a line. This is how you do a test. You can calculate these statistics, and out comes an answer. And it's awful, because it's just there's some algorithmic process. There's data, and you do things to it, almost as a sort of automatic process. And out comes some conclusion. It's taught. It can be taught like that. And worst of all, my fear is that might be the approach within data science, because as I'm being brought up as a statistician from a mathematical point of view, from probability theory, I love data science. And I love the thought of bringing these two fields together, because I really think this is the most essential development in, I would say, in intellectual life, for the next so many decades. These ideas coming together, I think it's staggeringly important. And so I wrote the book in order to try to bridge this gap, and to emphasize this idea that this is not an automatic process, that handling data, drawing conclusions from statistics, from numbers, is an art form. It requires judgment all the time, and experience and knowledge and context and care and thought and discussion. This is not an algorithm. You don't just get some data and throw a million different machine learning methods at it, and then out comes an answer. This is not appropriate professional behavior, that's what I'd say.
Let me say it differently, because I think it's very important what you just said. David Burton, in the history of mathematics, says that statistic and probability, I think much more probability, is so counterintuitive to our non-Western civilization. Like if you take 20,000 years ago or back, it is so counterintuitive to the Homo sapiens that it took humanity many, many years to develop this notion of uncertainty, and the last notion of how is the infinity. Therefore, infinity, like in group theory and counter infinity, was developed or invented in the first period of the 20th century, because it's so counterintuitive that you can't grasp infinity and you can't grasp probability.
I'm very clear in the book. For the one thing in the book, unlike most statistics books, I leave probability as late as possible. It doesn't come until 2/3 of the way through the book, which is the new way, which I think a very good way to teach statistics. The probability comes in very late, partly because you don't need it, and because it's so difficult. I mean, I always think, I got a quote in there that I use when people say, well, why do people find probability and statistical inference, why do they find it so difficult? And I say, well, I've worked in this area for 40 years now, and I finally concluded after years of work that it's because it really is difficult. This is difficult. And I say in the book, sorry, this is probability. This is difficult. This is not intuitive. I know it, my intuition about probability is terrible. Algebra and things, I can sort of feel I can work through something, and I got a feeling for what might come out. Not probability. It is so unintuitive. So it is tricky. So I suppose that's almost my two themes of the book, is that first of all, you need judgment in looking at data. But secondly, when you do actually start doing the technical stuff, it's challenging as well to understand what's going on. So it's this, I think, a beautiful combination of judgment and craft and skill, combined with something that actually can be technically quite difficult and intellectually difficult as well. So it's not easy, and it requires, I tend to think of it much more as a sort of craft, almost like people, I don't know, I do stained glass work. I'm not very good at it, but I know if I did more and more and more, I would get better and better, and I could learn about it, but I'm never going to be able to reduce that to some algorithmic process. And
it's not just hard when you present the Simpson paradox or the Monty Hall problem or all other, girl-boy paradox or girl in Florida. It's when you just, what's the probability to roll 4 in an even die or dice? There were 2 dice, 1 die. Okay, so because what does it mean? And when you go to the meaning of probability, and there is a great wiki article or wiki page about the meaning of probability, it's so, okay, let's say that I rolled the dice 6 times and I didn't get 4. Whom do I call to? What do we do?
I'm quite pleased. I think mine is a very basic book. There's almost no maths in it, but there's a big chunk of the philosophy of probability with, I think, 6 different possible meanings that people have come up for it. I mean, what is probability? Does it even exist? Because this is an unresolved philosophical problem. Nobody agrees on this. I've got my view. It's rather quite strong and radical, and which I've never shifted from for 50 years. But other people have different views. So it's actually revealing that on the base, underneath all this sort of intellectual structure, is a very difficult foundation. I mean, what is probability? And I would say it doesn't exist. And so I think we just made the whole thing up. So
what do you mean? Just like, okay, so we know there is like the frequent approach, and there is a Bayesian approach, or the subjective approach. But what do we mean by it's not exist?
It not exist. Well, it's the essentially the fairly extreme subjectivist Bayesian approach, which is what I take. So I was introduced to Dave Finetti's work, back when I was about 19, and he starts his book. It's called The Theory of Probability, and in the first paragraph he says, in big letters, probability does not exist, and so it doesn't have a separate, out there entity for itself. Except we do always have to make this except possibly at the subatomic level, when because Hawking and others have said that
there is real uncertainty.
They're real, genuine, determined probabilities. That there's nothing behind these probabilities. Nothing more we could know could ever tell us about.
This is great. Nothing behind the probability, because what David now says. Just a second. Let me just explain that the Bayesian approach means that that probability is just a measure of how subjectively certain you are in a specific outcome. Let's say that I'm going to say that the probability of Donald Trump wins the election in 2024, I think, is 60%. It only means that I subjectively, I believes in a 60% believes quantity, whatever that means, that he will win. Okay.
Yeah, the probability is you're expressing a relationship between you. You own the probability. It's your probability. It's not the probability. You should never, in my school of thinking, you should never use the word the probability, because that suggests it's some objective property of the world rather than your judgment about how the world works, except possibly at the subatomic level. I have to keep on adding that in.
But what is the probability of getting 4 aces in a row in a shuffle deck? So there is
I could say the probability doesn't exist, because it completely depends on the context. Who shuffled the deck?
If Percy Diaconis shuffles the deck,
if Percy Diaconis,
you should be aware.
He can put them on the top. So you have to make massive assumptions. In other words, all probabilities are conditional. They're conditional on your knowledge and assumptions. So they all are judgments based. They're all conditional, except at the subatomic.
Except the subatomic. Okay. So let's move to another thing, which is a great, and you organize my thoughts so well in page 78, and it goes, and you say, okay, it goes from data to sample to study population to target population. Yeah. And I think the idea was, like the example was, how many sex partners usually youth or adolescents has in Great Britain. So there is a data when what people say, and then you try to extrapolate from the data what is the real number in the sample. And then there is a study population when you try to extrapolate from the real numbers that you didn't get. You just got the number. You need to extrapolate for the target, for the study population, and then you need to extract for the target population, which is much harder. And every bit of this process is harder and harder and harder. Yeah. Therefore, when I conduct a poll about, the average sex partner in the UK, and I want to extract the real number, which is hidden, just God knows, the real number of how many sex partners, this is a very, very challenging, almost impossible task. Yes?
Well, we can have a go, but what that does is reveal these, 3 different stages at which, errors and mistakes can occur. And the sex partner one is, I think, partly because I've worked with the people who do those surveys. So, and I've written a whole book on sex statistics. So I know about that area and know about the problems of, as you said, of going from what somebody, I'm not pointing at you, but what somebody says when you ask them the question, through which you don't care how many sex, partners this actual person says. You couldn't care less. It's all anonymous. But what you want to know is, in the whole country, what's going on. And to go to as you said, go from those stages, there's all sorts of places where biases and errors can occur. The person may lie, they may not know, they can't remember. That's quite frequent. And then, you're actually, the people you're asking aren't random, and et cetera, et cetera. So all different issues, which we have to think about. So that's why you cannot just take the data you've got and say, well, therefore this means X, this means something. No, you have to think about all these processes. And God, I mean, this is what it's detective work. It's forensic statistics, which is what I've spent the last 2 years doing in COVID. Endless claims that people say, oh, look, here's some data. This means that masks don't work, or masks do work, or this means that the vaccines are harming people, or the vaccines are really working. And so they take a bit of data, and Israel, of course, had some of the best data on
yes.
This fantastic source of knowledge and information. I always think Britain has done pretty well in terms of its statistics, its contribution to COVID statistics, but I think it must be up there between Israel and Britain, who's done the most.
Kudos for Israel.
Yeah, no, brilliant stuff. Early, good data, really strong, and Strong's done good quality studies as well. So they, I mean, I always look, of course, at where it comes from. And so, am I going to believe this claim? Where it comes from. So again, what this shows is in a way, the skeptical mind, not cynical, but questioning mind, critical mind, that I'm not going to believe the data I'm just seeing and drawing some claim on it. This is one of the most difficult things to do and to teach. Almost the easy part of statistics is analyzing the data in front of you, what you learn in your courses at university. That's the easy bit. The difficult part is working out, well, what isn't in front of me? What am I not seeing? What have I not been told? Because that is even more important than what's in front of you. Because if what in front of you is a biased sample of what you're really interested in, then you will be completely deluded if you just put things through this algorithm. So you have to know, why am I seeing this data? And the other thing, of course, is who wants me to see it? Am I being fed this? Am I being manipulated by somebody who wants to argue for a particular position?
And
so you have to have this very questioning, skeptical, forensic, detective mind.
And another thing is how strong your conclusions should be, because you say, okay, let's say that I have the raw data of how many children visited hospitals in the UK in 2018, okay? Yeah. So this is a raw data that is basically valid. But then I want to know whether this number increased or decreased in the upcoming year, or what should I do to increase or decrease this number? And this is a whole different questions.
Yeah, but again, you have to distinguish that what I do within the book, which I don't think anybody normally deals with in the statistics book, is a data science issue when you've got all the data. So let's say we do know everything, all the hospital admissions, you've got a good record system, you actually know exactly how many people, there's no uncertainty about that. So where's the statistical inference? Well, the statistical inference is, in a way, is quite a subtle philosophical idea, because you have to think, well, the number we're seeing arose from some fairly, uncertain process. And so even if the numbers have gone down from the previous year, it doesn't necessarily mean that the underlying risk for people to go into hospital has gone down, because just by chance, it may be a bit lower this year. Now, we've got all the data. There's no sample, but there's still uncertainty, not about the numbers, but there's uncertainty about the underlying process. Now, this gets into a real philosophical idea, because we have to think, well, I find it very helpful to think of the fact that, well, we're seeing one world and many others might have occurred. We're just seeing, there's all these different paths the world can take, and we're seeing one, and we have to think, well, we're only seeing one. What other ones might have been plausible? And I think that's actually not a ridiculous idea. But when we've got all the data, there's no sample. And also, I like the idea when I'm thinking about the future, is not to think in terms of chance too much or any of those ideas, just to think of, well, possible futures. As we look forward, there's all these little branches, all these little triggers we can take. This multiverse idea, we can all go down so many paths. Only one of them we're going to stay in, we're going to observe. Now, what we want to know is, well, in all these branches going out, what proportion, roughly, do we think are going to end up with me dead in 10 years or something? And that's the in a way, metaphor I like for thinking about my probability of surviving 10 years, which I personally judge, I won't put a number on it now, but I could judge that. I think of it in terms of, well, all these possible futures. Some of them I'm going to be alive, some of them I'm going to be dead. How many of them am I going to be dead in? And it's only a metaphor. I'm not saying these multiverses are there, but I think it's a really powerful image and metaphor.
But with your permission, I think there is another very important point in your book that I can relate to Francis Bacon, because Francis Bacon, like the father of modern science, taught us that you need to start with the data and then construct a theory, but it doesn't go like this. Never. It never goes like this. You always start with a theory, with some theory in mind, and then you try to say or to feed the data, because you said it took so much time to correlate between smoking and lung cancer, because many people who smoked didn't have lung cancer. Mm-hmm. So we always start with some notion of theory of how those 2 or 3 or 10 or I don't know how many variables are connected, and then we try to apply the data. And we never start with the data, because data itself has infinity different interpretations.
I mean, it really comes down, as talked about in the book a lot, about, what do we mean by a model? A model is sort of a map for how we think the world works, a mathematical representation of how, which is the first thing about it, is always inadequate. So it's all, George Box's statement, all models are wrong. It's always inadequate. It can never explain the whole world. We can't even explain how, three molecules bounce around each other. So it's
the three-body problem.
Yeah, we can't do that. And so how can we ever mathematicize the world? So it's always inadequate, but it can be really useful. And that's why, we spend all the time with data. We are, as you said, moving between our understanding of how the world works, the data with things we actually observe, and they interact with each other all the time. The data helps us try to improve our model by some sort of inductive process, and then we make judgments about what we might expect to see. We observe some data, it doesn't fit, and so it goes on in this sort of cyclical process of continually revising our understanding of the world.
Or how you say it, you call it PPDGC.
Oh, there you go. PP. Yes. I forgot PP. Yes. PPD. I forgot what it is now. Problem, plan, data, conclusion,
analysis,
PPD.
and okay. So, now, with your permission, let me show you a very, very funny meme that was I think, very popular 2 years ago. And the idea is like this: if you watch us on Spotify, so there is a crank in the wall, says statistic, and then I put a frame on the crank, and then it's called machine learning. But then I have many people watching this work of art, and this called artificial intelligence, which basically says that artificial intelligence is nothing more than algorithm and math. You put algorithm, you put math, and this giant unicorn is called machine learning. Nothing new in this field. And many people say, okay, this is basically, we have nothing more in machine learning and artificial intelligence than statistics. And this is just a fancy way to say statistic, which we have been doing all the time ever since Francis Galton and Ronald Fisher and Pearson and all the great names from like 100 years ago. And basically machine learning hasn't developed anything new beside fancy words and fancy names for well-known statistical procedures. Do you agree? Or do you understand those jokes?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I hear those all the time. And but what the better picture would be, of course, to show in the final one some funders coming out and giving the person lots of money to do their research,
yes,
and not giving the statisticians anything at all. So that would, or someone buying their product because it says AI on it, which is utter nonsense. Anyway,
when you fundraising, it's AI. When you hiring, it's machine learning. When you implementing, it's linear regression, and when you debug, it's print. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of think, well, I've been doing, according to what's called AI now, I've been doing that for 30 years. And I think, well, maybe I should just always have said I was working in AI. I used to work in AI. I used to. No, I mean, there's a few reasons I disagree. This is not just, there's an intersection between statistics and machine learning and data science and AI. But because the cartoons you're showing, I think wrongly go against everything I've just said, because it's suggesting that statistics is some algorithmic mathematical process to automatically extract information from data. And my entire argument for our discussion in the book is saying, no, it isn't. You cannot, it's much, much bigger than that. That is just one tiny bit of it. But there again, I think, though, that machine learning, in terms of, well, in one way, I'd agree that some of its objectives, I mean, part of statistics has been to do with classification and prediction and things like that.
And regression.
But using on the whole a very limited set of tools in terms of regression. I think we're fantastically strong, amazingly powerful, and often just as powerful as the more complex ones. But there has been an enormous growth in sophisticated machine learning methods, which I'm full of admiration for. But they're still just, especially with supervised learning methods, but the other unsupervised stats had some basic cluster analysis stuff for ages. Obviously, it's got enormously more sophisticated. So that particular branch, which was one corner of statistics, has grown up brilliantly and doing fantastic work. I mean, I think the sort of stuff in random forests in particular, just extraordinary how powerful it is and how effective it is. I also would say that I think one should always try to do things as simply as possible. So in that sense, yeah, there's an intersection there, and the machine learning, but it's a Venn diagram, and there's an intersection within these sort of what you might call rather standard statistical methods. But intellectually, I don't really see a big difference between these, the regression stuff and the others.
Let me give you the other side of this equation. And there is a great Medium article named No, Machine Learning is Not Just Glorified Statistics. And he says two very, very important things. One, that you can be very good at machine learning without knowing advanced statistics. This is true. This is, as George Bush called it, a true fact. And the other thing is that regression over 1 million variables is unachievable in normal or classical statistical approaches. And this is one very thing.
No, and that's all I'm saying. Exactly, I agree that statistical methods have, on the whole, because of the problems they are much more restricted. But the basic idea is extended, and I really like the fact that there's a big overlap in the skills and the people who work on massive regression problems. Well, they're an extension of them. It's not. They are new, and they're brilliant, and they absolutely do fantastic stuff. So it's definitely not just statistics at all. No.
I had a talk with Charles Mary, the author of Bell Curve, or the co-author of Bell Curve, and he said something very nice. He said he's a social scientist, and he said that the idea that the social sciences has implemented only one method of one algorithm, which is linear regression, just one variable linear regression, made this field so less powerful than what it could have been. Because we said so many phenomena can't be explained using one variable linear regression.
Well, possibly. But if you start throwing these enormously complicated black box methods at social science data, I would be so deeply skeptical of anything that came out of it. I really would, because it's bad enough. People find it just using regression and structural equation modeling and things like that, difficult enough to produce something sensible and reliable. If you threw all these complicated methods,
but just David,
I mean, that's when people start saying, "Oh, I'm going to apply machine learning to this database," and I think, "Oh, for heaven's sake, I'm deeply skeptical about applying very complex methods to what I might call sort of very poorly structured data, possibly, which with not reliably collected. There's the total difference between using these methods on image data, on really technological data, where you know what you're doing, you know the method, you know exactly what you've got in front of you, or games, of course, and that. So there's a massive jump in category of problem to move into, general medical databases or general sociological data and things like that. It's
okay,
just
so let me give you the other side of the equation. It's very hard to think of even one example of any relationship between two variables in the social science that is purely linear and it doesn't converge or it doesn't have a U-shape. So so if you're applying linear regression and just linear regression, then your ability to explain or to understand the real relations between variables is decreased tremendously.
You can move to a generalized additive model or something like that. So, but still something that's essentially transparent, that you can understand what's going on, you can demonstrate what's going on. So, yeah, obviously people have been too restricted, but I'm as I said, I'm very skeptical about moving to black box algorithmic methods.
10 layers, neural networks.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. They are for the right problem. They are fantastically effective for the right technological problem to solve, engineering sort of problem to solve about protein folding and things like that. Absolutely brilliant, genius, wonderful work. Don't start thinking that somehow you can put these onto
because in the social life you want your model to be explainable. You want to be able to interpret your model in a way that you understand it.
I think not just there.
Yes.
But in almost any area, I mean, explainable AI is obviously a massive area, quite rightly, because we know the fragility of some black box methods through tiny changes in inputs. We know, and trustworthy algorithms should, unless they can demonstrate unbelievable performance under all sorts of situations.
Image classification. I can handle with black boxes in image classification because it's much better than human. So I don't know what happened there in layer number 17, and I really don't care. But I know that it gave me good results.
Yes, because you've got enough empirical situation. But even then, quite often you could tweak just a few things and get some. Anyway, you usually need empirical testing on that. But no, explainable AI is really is an incredibly important area. But
it's very hard to achieve.
It is hard to achieve. But I mean, that's why, of course, I would always say that the first thing is, could you do it simpler? There's always the first question I ask. And often, I do have a bit of a problem with people calling things AI, which are often, regression, or could be done just as well with regression. And I think, well, that's fine, but then let's call nearly all statistics AI. The fact that AI, it's got to be using some complex machine learning method. Well, this is nonsense. AI has nothing to do with what's under the bonnet, under the hood. AI is to do with the function, how it works in society. If it's a regression, because we build decision support systems for doctors that give probabilities of cancer patients surviving 10 years and things like that. And it's built on a Cox regression, and we don't call it AI. We should call it AI. We'd have got more funding if we'd called it AI. And actually it is AI. According to almost all definitions currently being used in the EU, it is AI. It's just that I don't like using the phrase because for me, it's a toxic phrase because it's associated almost always with somebody trying to manipulate somebody. The media or funders or things. So I think AI is a toxic phrase. I won't use it.
Okay.
Even though what I do is AI.
Okay, so please give me an advice, because I'm a teacher and I teach data science. I teach the course Introduction to Data Science.
Right.
And this is why I love your book so much, because it has the Titanic database from Kaggle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the Titanic database is like it's like the most important, no, it's not important, but the most famous database. It's like the Iris database, which I hate so much.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Okay. Yeah. But the Titanic database, it's so important. It's so popular, and it basically, could you build a model that classify or predict who is going to survive the Titanic crash and who is going to not survive the Titanic crash? And the idea is that there is no perfect model, because who decided was God, and God had like other metrics. So, and this is so important that I see something from the data science realm in statistics. So please give me an advice. How do I incorporate statistic and probability? And I do incorporate probability, but how do I incorporate statistics when I teach introduction to data science, in your opinion?
Yes, it's tricky. I think data science is wonderful because it's got a much more broader perspective than
we have much more students in data science.
Of course you do. It's
the statistics department.
Yeah, it's quite good. I mean, I now really, I think everything should be renamed statistics and data science. But I think keeping a distinction, because data science is it's a technology. It's solving problems for people. It's taking data and using them to solve problems and producing, in a way, products almost that do something. And statistics is, I think, broader because there's big intersection. Data science, contains lots of stuff on the data wrangling, the structuring the data, the doing things with it, the technology of doing things with it. And statistics has got a lot more on the sort of philosophy of learning and probability theory and the ideas of inference. And I think the crucial idea is this idea of inference. Data science tends to be, I think, taught like, doing things to data. So you've got a list of, you've got all sorts of different algorithms you can apply to it, got nice graphics you can use, you've got all sorts of technology, and something comes out. Now, okay, now what? Now what? Is it any good? Could it have been better? What are the problems here? Crucially, what is my uncertainty in it on thing? What's the uncertainty? And so in a way, statistics is that provides that extra idea, having you produce something, and now you want to say, well, is it any good? Is this reliable? Are the claims I'm making reliable? And for that, you need a broader perspective, because for that, you have to go beyond the data that's actually in front of you.
And it's not just a confusion matrix. So let me just pinpoint this point, because when I say, okay, how accurate your model is, so I have F1 score, and I have like the confusion matrix, and I have true positive, true negative, and I have type 1, type 2 errors. But you said no, those are great, but just go higher and higher. Say, okay, what's the meaning of all this?
Well, the first thing is that I would always, classification, sometimes you need a classification, but to really evaluate a system, you have to look at the probabilities it's giving to the outcome. So the probabilities are the most basic output, and any decent system should be able to provide probabilities in order to express the confidence in any classification that it makes. Is it just on the boundary, or is it really, really confident? So first of all, we can look at the probabilities, and just modeling those probabilities requires a different perspective to say, well, I'm not going to say this is black or white. I'm going to put, well, it's maybe this, it may be that. So then we start thinking about our uncertainty about any classification. So I think that's, the first step, and that starts getting very statistical. But even beyond that, I think it's still, how do I know whether this is going to work the Titanic is a bit ridiculous because, first of all, who cares? And secondly, it's not going to happen again. It's not like this is a transferable bit of technology. But if it's really going to be useful in data science, it's going to be something you build and then start applying elsewhere to new areas, to new data. Now, you can always do split sample and cross-validation and things like that. But frankly, that is still inadequate to judge actually whether the claims I'm making based on the data in front of me are going to be applicable in other contexts. And that's science, but it's also technology when we want to move that technology into another context. And that is statistics. That is the art of learning from data, because you cannot tell that just from the data in front of you. You have to know about the possible biases in the data which you collected. In other words, its generalizability outside your particular little context requires that sort of judgment and knowledge. And that's why, fair AI, explainable AI, unbiased AI and things like that have become so important, because they're all things that go outside just producing a classifier. So I think that's where these bigger ideas of learning from data are, I think they're essential within data science. Otherwise, data science just becomes a bag of tricks, and it becomes like a parody of statistics. Statistics, as I said, a lot of statistics is badly characterized as a bag of tricks. Oh, we've got some data, we do a regression, we do an analysis of variance outcomes, a p-value and things like that. Awful way to think of statistics. It's so not that. And it'd be terrible if data science got that same badge. Oh, it's just, we've got this list of support vector machines and, the
KNN.
And we just run through them one after the other, and like I did on the Titanic feature, and looked at which one did best. Okay, I did it because it was interesting. I wanted to illustrate some points, but that is not, that is so limited as an idea of data science.
One thing that I teach my students regarding the Titanic dataset is which one is better, to be wealthy on the Titanic ship or to be women? Let's say that God gave you the opportunity. What do you want to be?
That's interesting. Yeah.
You want to be a woman or you want to be wealthy? You want to be a child or you want to be... So this gives us...
lovely questions.
Yes, this gives us something that you can relate to, because again, you can extrapolate the knowledge of the Titanic to anything outside the realms of the 1912 accident. Because it's not the same.
Like those are really nice questions. Of course, you want to be a wealthy woman.
Yes. A wealthy woman is much better. Now, first of all, David, thank you so much for your time. I have one last question, which strikes me as a researcher, as a young researcher. And your Google Scholar profile is, I don't have many adjectives. I think staggering is the word I'm looking for. But so please, and don't give me this this fake humble right now, because this is a genuine request. As a young researcher, you have like over 130,100, it's uncountable number of citation, which means that your work influenced many people. Basically, it doesn't just mean that you got the tenure earlier or you got a professor or you got a full faculty professor. It means basically that your work has influenced many people. This is why we think about this citation index. So as a guy who have 2015 right now, 215, could you give me some tips or advice how to increase this number, how to be more influential?
Okay, I mean, I think those two things are not, there may be a correlation, but there's, you can have a lot of citations and not be, and vice versa. But I think all I can do is just say what I suppose my lesson I've learned from my career. Well, I'm very lucky. Be lucky. Usual thing, it was be lucky.
What are the odds?
Yeah, exactly. Be in a job where you can. Actually, my main thing was I was in a job where I could choose what I wanted to work on, and it was at a time when there's a huge number of new ideas coming up, Bayesian statistics, Markov chain, Monte Carlo. It was at a time of massively increased computation, so suddenly we could do things we couldn't do before, and so and the other thing is, it's an awful thing to say. I wouldn't say be fashionable, but look at what is actually interesting. What do people actually want to know? And go with your enthusiasm, and not just, rather than burying into one small area and doing this. Actually, look at what's going on. What's the fun stuff? What are people talking about? So I've actually sort of shamelessly gone for fairly popular things that I know people will be interested in, that I'll get invited to give talks on, and so
this is a very honest advice. I've never heard this advice. I think it's very true, but it's very honest advice. Usually people don't say, I seek for my own passion that was deeply unrelated to what the public wanted to know. No.
I think you should, but because I want to be involved in the public debate about it. Now, increasingly, I do a lot of media stuff. I want to be there. I want to be working with the public. And you don't get there, I don't think, unless you have got a bit of an ear for what people are actually interested in. I mean, that itself is not enough. You can't just otherwise all you'll do is work on sports work or, political polling or the stuff that gets in the news. So you have to also I think it's not just that. you also have to think about, you have to actually be in touch with intellectual trends as well. As I said, the move towards realizing that modern computation would make Bayesian methods practical for the first time. And that suddenly opened up an enormous, absolute explosion around about 1990. It was the most exciting time.
And how do you find those trends right now? Using like the Google Trends, or using
I don't know. Oh, you got a sniffer? No, sniff the world. Be aware of what the debates are going on. That's why conferences are so good. I mean, and things where you can actually find out, what's the cool, what's interesting, where is this field going? What are dead ends, and where is this field going? What is actually going to be? What is actually going to work? I mean, the other thing is, right back in the 1980s, working with Yuda Pearl and others on putting probability into AI. That was again in 1986, and that was a tremendously exciting time of bringing together graphical modeling and AI. It was wonderful, wonderful time. So then, I mean, the other thing I've done is get involved in it's kind of fairly high profile public works, in public inquiries into scandals and things like that, and which I'm on one at the moment. I should be working on it, on infected blood. So and that's quite good, partly because it's of genuine public interest, and I think you are helping the debate, but also because people are interested in it. But I think for the real citations have come from papers on Bayesian methodology, which was based at this time when of bringing together the mathematical work and the practical work at a time when this is where things were moving. This is the movement. You're going with where this is so exciting. We're meeting each other and we're talking. Oh, and every time you talk to someone else, it's gone on a bit, and almost trying to be in on that wave of where the intellect in the interesting stuff has gone, but not just for not pure populism. You have to combine it with some, I think, real work with other collaborations on the intellectual basis for that. So I know I can, exactly. It's funny, I'm making this up as I go along, but I think where I've managed to do is to both combine the sort of trying to develop the intellectual foundations and statistical foundations in areas that were really interesting. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm sure that it doesn't apply to you because you're like a genius, but the idea is, that many times when you seek for the fashionable topics, you have like the top notch, you have all the geniuses in this field. And many people say that in the AI, we extract or we pulled the AI community, or even, Microsoft, Apple, Google, just sucked all the great talents from the university to their corporation. And when you try to contribute to these fields, you better be very, very smart. And if you say, okay, I'm not sure that I'm in the level of David Spiegelhalter or Jan LeCun or Jeff Hinton or all the other great names, I wonder whether this advice apply to people who are not in the very, very far right.
I mean, you're wrong. I'm not very smart. I'm not very clever. My maths isn't very good. But what I've done is sort of spot gaps in the market where there is an opportunity. For example, and I don't know what's going on enough in the world now, but seeing an area which is of interest where other people are not spending all their time working. I don't know whether it's criminology or whether it's even archaeology, it's somewhere where there's a possibility. The other thing I've always done is collaborate massively. Always work with people, almost never on my own. So always collaborated hugely on people who were often very interested in particular problems. So I worked in a huge amount with doctors and others, and now working in criminology. But I think spotting in a way where a new technology can meet problems people genuinely have, and you can genuinely help them, that everybody loves that. Everybody from both sides really love it. If you can do that. I mean, I was working on, working with surgeons on their mortality rates, but also can then combine it with industrial quality control techniques, QSUMs and things like that, sequential analysis. And putting those two together was enormously fruitful and got a huge amount of coverage, interest, because you were saying, well, here's these methods developed for measuring stuff coming off production lines. And here's this surgeon worried about his patients, and we're going to put those together. So it was never, people had never done that before. So I think that it's spotting those gaps where you can bring together somebody. You won't be best at any of these things, but you're the intermediary that can understand enough of the really clever stuff and understand enough of someone's problem that you can bring these things together. And that's where data science is so cool. It's just great stuff because you can be those intermediaries, to do that kind of work.
It's like the frog. It's not the best or the fastest fish in the water, it's not the fastest animal on land, but just his mere ability to live both in water and in land makes it like a whole difference. Make the whole difference.
Statisticians are all frogs. I mean, and so I can point anything I do. There's always large numbers of people who are better at it than I am. Huge numbers I can list. Nothing I do is, but it's the combination you can put together that can be so valuable. And maybe this combination is much more valuable now than ever, since we have so many different disciplines and realms and so much knowledge. So just the mere fact that you can, that you understand a little bit of one thing and a little bit of one thing, and you can do the connection, although you are not an expert, you're not a genius, just the mere fact that you could connect two seemingly unrelated dots makes the whole difference. That's where I've always tried to work on. It's what statisticians have tended to do, and I think data scientists can do as well, because in a way it's a nice term. It's an enabling technology. It's something that just helps things happen by bringing together expertise in different areas. But it doesn't mean that you are the star of anything particularly. And
the very last question: what's your one best productivity tip? And please don't tell me, no, I'm not very productive. Okay.
Oh God, no. Walking. Because you do need that. For me, I'm most productive when I'm really left alone for hours to just get on with something and be really focused. And I like being on my own, and I like working on my own, but you need to get out and walk as well, because it's when you're walking that everything sorts itself out, everything settles down. Or sleeping. That's the other best productivity sleep is sleeping as well. So walking and sleeping, I would say, are the best ways to get.
But sleeping is most beneficial when you go to sleep with one specific
with a problem in your
mind. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I wake up all the time. So unfortunately, productivity is trying to get some time on your own somewhere quiet, and
David Spiegelhalter, Sir David Spiegelhalter, the author of The Art of Statistics, Learning from Data. Many people said, you're going to speak with a Cambridge professor. How can we handle your bad accent? And you did tremendously well. Thank you so much for your patience. And it was so much enlightening and so much fun. And this is a great book. Just read this book. It's a really fabulous read. Thank you so much for your time. I learned so much.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. It'd be really fun. You can tell I could go on for hours.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, David.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Bye bye.